Hello whisky fans, we've got another Scottish single malt whisky with us here today, and this is kind of the sister to the Glen Moray Elgin Classic that I reviewed very recently. This is also a Glen Moray Elgin Classic, but it's the peated single malt version. So if you haven't seen my review of the standard Elgin Classic, I pretty much liked it. It's a sweet, malty, bourbonised, very affordable, reasonable quality, good, honest single malt. Just going to do the obligatory walk around of the label on this one, although it is very, very similar to the other Elgin Classic. So it's 40%, has got a cork, not a screw top. It does sell for about the same price here in the UK as the normal Elgin Classics, around £18–20, almost always on offer in the supermarkets. It doesn't say either way if it's chill filtered, but looking how clear that is, it is. It doesn't say either way if it's coloured, but looking at the colour, it is. And one thing I do think about this one is that the colour is definitely unnaturally coloured, and the colour of that whisky really doesn't match the whisky that's in the bottle. It's quite dark for something that in my opinion is quite young, and just giving something that tint doesn't match a young peated single malt to me, and that's a little bit odd and a little bit jarring, but most people probably aren't going to notice that. What I'll also say about the label is that on this one, and I suspect probably all bottles, they've actually put the label on top of the little dimples in the glass that the bottling machine uses to align the bottle. You can see that's made a real mess of the label, which, even though this is very affordable, almost budget Scotch, it's really not very good. It doesn't give you a very good impression. So there's two things that most people are probably going to know about Glen Moray. One is that the distillery is basically, it exists as blend fodder. It produces high volumes of whisky. Most of it never actually gets into bottles of single malt. It goes into things like Cutty Sark blended Scotch and Label 5, because it's actually now owned by a French company, and it's the company that produces Label 5 blended Scotch. The other thing that you might know about Glen Moray is that it's generally an unpeated style of Scotch whisky. So this peated single malt Elgin Classic is one of a few whiskies that have popped up in the last 5 or 10 years as distilleries have started to notice the extreme popularity and almost cult-like frenzy around peated, especially Islay single malt. A lot of distilleries that don't normally produce peated single malt have started to add it to their repertoire, and sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. So off the top of my head I can immediately think of Annock Knockdhu Distillery, which was previously an unpeated single malt, and they started to produce their own peated whiskies, and I think it works phenomenally well. At the other end of the spectrum you've got Glendronach Distillery, which I think is a fantastic distillery producing really nice sherried style of whisky, but their peated expression was a bit naff, not very good. Thankfully it does seem like a lot of these distilleries have calmed down a little bit now. It doesn't seem like we've got too many distilleries having a go at a peated whisky anymore. Might be that they've realised that it's not quite as simple as just switching your unpeated malt for a peated malt and carrying on as usual. It doesn't always work that way. I think for a distillery to make really good peated whisky, the base spirit and the house style has to really match those heavier, peaty, very dominant flavours, and if it doesn't, it can come out quite jarring and quite often quite ugly, especially if they think they can get away with releasing a peated whisky at a very young age. I think the fact that we're seeing less of these distilleries coming out with new peated expressions when they haven't done them before is probably a sign that they've realised that you can't just peat it like a Lagavulin and expect it to be Lagavulin or even taste like Lagavulin. Sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken. Let's see how it tastes. So on the nose it is immediately apparent that there is quite a bit of peat in this whisky, definitely more than you get in the normal Elgin Classic. And it's actually surprisingly quite a dry, aggressive, acrid peatiness. Getting notes of smoked ham, damp gristiness, It's a smoky bonfire peat almost. Actually comes over as a little bit of a harsh peatiness, and that may be because there's not that much else going on in this whiskey. It hasn't got that robust spirit to back up and provide a counterpoise to the peatiness. What spirit that you have got on the nose, because it is definitely there and you can definitely smell it, you've got a nice sort of tutti fruity chewing gum sort of aroma, some banana-y notes and some creamy vanilla. So you can definitely tell that there's bourbon casks gone into this, and I personally think that despite the peatiness, you can still tell that this is Glen Moray under everything. Let's see how it tastes. So on the palate, I'm getting more dry, peppery peat, so it is in keeping with what I got on the nose. Getting some quite nice wood smoke and spicy, almost mesquite, wood-fired barbecue notes. But it does have to be said that the peat on the palate does fall off quite quickly. It's quite a nice explosion of peat on the arrival, but it quickly fades away, and then you're left with more of that spiritiness, a little bit of lemony vanilla, and a slightly dry, oaky black coffee note on the palate. And out of the two, the nose and the palate, when you're actually drinking this whiskey, it's, in my opinion, actually much closer to the unpeated Elgin Classic. On the nose, you get quite a lot of peat. It's quite a different beast. But on the palate, it really goes back to its old ways. Just going to try a little bit more. Right, as for the finish, it's, I think, probably mostly down to the fact that this is bottled at 40%. It is a little bit weak and watery on the finish, and to this whiskey's credit, it's not really that weak or underpowered on the nose or the palate, but when you get to the finish, it does tend to wrap up quite quickly, fades away, and becomes quite mild. And what you are left with on the very late palate and as you go into the finish is a little bit of a strange salty vanilla note, and right on the death of it, you're just left with this vague sense of peated grist and bourbon matured whiskey. So slightly let down by a little bit of a subpar finish. Would have been nice at maybe even just 42% would have really improved this one. But as it is, I think at £18-20 this is really good value. Unless you really hate your peated whiskey, I don't think you can go too wrong with this one, providing you don't have too high expectations. I'm going to give it a C+. Going to actually stick my neck out a little bit here and say that this Glenelgin Peated Single Malt does remind me a little tiny bit of Ardbeg 10-year-old. Now, the peatiness in this one, it's completely worlds apart. On a scale of peatiness, you would have this on the absolute low end of the peatiness spectrum, and Ardbeg 10 would be absolutely at the other end. But I don't know if it's a coincidence that Glen Moray, a lot of you will probably know, used to actually be owned by the same company as Ardbeg, and I can't help thinking that it's not a coincidence that this one has got that slightly similar, dry, acrid, fumy, slightly aggressive peat to it. I don't know if it's because they used some inside knowledge or started with a similar recipe for the peated grist, maybe getting it to the same specification that Ardbeg get. But there's something in there that does remind me a little bit of Ardbeg, although I must say that compared to Ardbeg, this is a very anemic copy, if that's what they were trying to do. So thank you all for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think of Glen Moray and the Glen Moray Peated Whisky, and what you think about distilleries having a go at making peated whisky. Does it work? What have you had that you've liked, and what have you found that's not so good? Let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you. Cheers.